That Was Yesterday podcast is brought to you by Define Mind and Body Wellness, my wellness center here in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where we specialize in holistic services to help shortcut the process so that you can see results fast, but learn to do it in a habitual way. So many of the topics we talk about are part of the program that our clients receive, except they get much more in-depth detail. Also, my workbook of the 10-week program to lose and never look back, which is only available to our patients at Define. If you are interested in holistic body fat spot reduction, or our pod to increase your metabolism, or our cold plunge, or our sauna, which is the best sauna in the world, that I promise you. I know that sounds biased, but you'll see for yourself. Please go to definewellnesscenter.com. You will be prompted to put your information in and make sure to mention podcast when you do, as you will be eligible for a bigger discount on our introductory services because you are a listener. Appreciate you. Have a great day and enjoy today's podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the That Was Yesterday podcast. Today, we're picking back up where we left off on our weight loss tips for women series. And today we are talking about accountability and nutrition. We're talking about ways of which you can use the power of accountability to fit into your life, to fit into your busy schedule, to help keep you moving forward towards your goals. Because as we know, it is certainly a struggle. It doesn't have to be as hard of a struggle or as much of a struggle, but it certainly is a struggle nonetheless for women to lose weight, especially in and around menopause. But accountability can be a powerful tool. So we're going to talk about ways of which you can utilize that. And on the nutrition front, we're going to talk about everything from macronutrients, what they are and what you need to know, to lactose and gluten intolerance, to intermittent fasting, alcohol, and much more. Let's dive right in. All right, so the next really important tip for weight loss for women, this is something that I think women do really good on whenever they're doing well, right? And it's accountability. So if you look at Weight Watchers, why does Weight Watchers work? Well, the plan has changed, over the years as far as like the point system and how it's structured. I can tell you right now, that plan isn't the best eating plan in the world. Now, it can help you lose weight. I don't believe it actually teaches you how to eat in a way that's fully healthy, but it has gotten better over the years. And look, if it's something that's working for you, keep doing what's working for you. As long as you feel like you know what you need to do and you're living a balanced life, keep doing it. So I'm going to probably keep saying that as we move through today, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That being said, I do want to share sort of my take on a lot of this stuff based on what I do every day and what I've done for the last few decades. That being said, with Weight Watchers, what works the most is the accountability component. It's showing up to be on a scale. Now, I don't think weighing yourself is the best option, but having that accountability to meet with somebody, to meet with a group of people is very effective. By what I just said, I'm not necessarily recommending to go do Weight Watchers. However, I am recommending some level of accountability. And so there's a few different ways you can go about it. The most simple way is to contact a friend or coworkers who have similar goals that you have and just set up some sort of accountability system. Like, hey, every week, and it could be a lot of different ways, right? It could be let's say you have a friend who lives in Ohio and you live in Connecticut. It could be like, hey, Jill, every Saturday, let's send each other an email and just share how our last week of eating was, how our last week of workouts were, and whatever else, right? If it's somebody in your neighborhood, or if there's a series of parents who live in your neighborhood, or moms, or a lot of other people around, you can get a group text and say, hey, I'm going for a walk today. Who wants to come? And encourage them to include you and the rest of the group on a text when they're going for a walk, and ask for that. It could be joining a facility with a friend, whether it's something like a Planet Fitness, whether it's a senior center, whether it's a place like Define. We have a lot of friends who come here as escape from the outside world. They kind of treat it as, because what we do at Define is it both like escape from the chaos of everyday world. So it gives you that spa experience, but it's also holistic body fat spot reduction and other holistic treatments that's going to change your body. So it's something fun to do with a friend, whether it's a cold plunge, sauna, or even just going and getting treatments on the same day. But the point is having somebody that when you don't want to do it, they're going to be like, hey, come on, like, we're going to do this, right? That's the point of accountability. Another level of accountability that's really important is social accountability. Basically saying, hey, I am doing this Drop one size program at Define. You post it on your social media. You post it on, whether it's your Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be. The reason that works is because more likely than not, you're not going to want to answer the people if you aren't doing the things you need to do. And so you be more likely to do the things that you need to do. So any one of those levels of accountability, whether it's working out at home with somebody, going for a walk with somebody, meeting somebody at the gym or any other facility, or just having someone to correspond with and check in with, is extremely important. Now, the accountability gets better, and this is obviously a biased statement, but I do believe it to be true. Whenever you're investing in yourself, you're going to have more accountability. So like paying for a boutique gym membership where it's $150 a month, you'll be more likely to work out than paying for a $10 a month membership that you don't really care. There's really no emotional connection there. So investing in a coach is obviously another way to get accountability, because you're putting money forward and you have somebody else who has then taken an interest in you, whose role is to help support you in that regard. So accountability is a tip, is something that works really well. I wanted to just sprinkle that in there. So let's talk about one of the biggest topics when it comes to women losing weight, which is nutrition. Now, the issue with nutrition is that so many of us were never taught how to eat right. We had the food pyramid. The food pyramid is a joke. Literally, the base of the food pyramid reads 8 to 11 servings of rice, cereal, or bread per day. 8 to 11 servings of rice, cereal, or bread per day. You show me, especially a woman, because obviously, as we all know, it's harder for women to lose than it is for men. You show me a woman who follows that metric, who is not a competitive athlete, and you show me someone who does all of that and is in really good, healthy shape. Very unlikely. If you're eating 8 to 11 servings of carbohydrates per day and you're not a competitive athlete, it's likely you're going to have diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, and who knows what else. The food pyramid was not designed to teach you how to eat. The food pyramid was designed to sell commodities. And you could argue that there were even deeper reasons as to why they were telling us to eat a certain way that wasn't healthy. I'm not going to get that far, but wouldn't be surprised. The point is, that's really the only education that so many of us have had about nutrition. Now, fast forward to today, with the access we have online and social media, there's no shortage of information. But the question is what do I do? How should I eat? Should I eat carbs? Should I not eat carbs? Do I do macros? Do I not do macros? And all of these sorts of questions. So I want to sort of break this down for you guys in a simple way. So first and foremost, it's important to identify macronutrients. What are macronutrients? Macronutrients is anything that gives you energy. So protein, carbohydrates, and fat, they directly give you energy. Protein and carbohydrates are 4 calories a gram, 9 calories a gram. By the way, alcohol is 7 calories a gram, just as an FYI. But with macronutrients, your protein, fat, carbohydrates, you're getting something that gives you energy. And as such, it's giving you nutrients and things that your body's actually going to use, assuming it's the right type of calories, right amount of calories, and all that good stuff. Something like alcohol is 7 calories a gram, but that's what's called, it's a perfect example of what's called an empty calorie, in that it's 7 calories a gram and there's no nutrients. Now, some can argue, oh, well, red light has good properties for your health, your heart and inflammation, yada, yada. I mean, yeah, maybe. But there's other things you can do to get those benefits. So let's not lie to ourselves and think that that's the best option. But in the same breath, and I'm going to get into this in a few minutes, I am not a coach who believes you need to stop drinking alcohol when you have goals. Look, if you're going to step on stage to bodybuild, different story. But if you're someone who just wants to get in the best shape of your life and you enjoy cocktail here and there, you shouldn't stop it. I mean, do what you want to do, but I'm just sharing. Anytime you tell the brain no, you're going to want it more. And so I would not do that. I'm going to talk more about alcohol in a few moments here. But let's focus primarily first on the macronutrients. And I'm going to focus there because you probably have heard the type of eating or the diet, the meal planning, reverse feeding, whatever context you've heard it called macros. And that's basically all that is proportions of your macronutrients, percentages of your macronutrients based on where you're at, what your goals are, and what percentage of those macronutrients you need to have per day. Macros can be a really good approach if you are someone who is a competitive bodybuilder or a high performance athlete, where every single calorie you need to account for because you want to dial it in. But for everyday people looking to lose 10 or more pounds, I think macros can actually be a waste of time and a cause of a lot of frustration because it can cause you to fixate on numbers. And eating clean and health are way beyond numbers. As we said in the first episode of this series, weight loss is emotional, it is not logical. And so the more involved we are with numbers, that tends to lead us down a negative path. And some people will argue, well, but it gives me certainty, it knows how much I can have. And yes, to some degree, but that could also be some self-sabotage going on there because you're kind of justifying something that's going to make you more comfortable. Where I would argue the benefit there would be to give yourself room to be imperfect and accept that, learning how to eat about looking at food in a way of like portion sizes and eyeballing, which is, I think, the best, most long-term strategy to figure out how much you need to eat. And I can talk more about that in a minute, but that's a better approach. And then the internal stuff that your mind's telling you about that, oh, well, I could eat too much or whatever else that negative talk is in your mind, working on that. Because numbers can sometimes, when you focus on numbers, it can sometimes distract you from the internal healing that really should take place if you want long-term change. So food for thought. That being said, you don't need macros. I can tell you that much if you have 10 pounds or more to lose. So it is important to identify what they are, but in terms of like knowing the exact percentages, you don't need to know that as much. And again, the reason why is because it's going to cause more stress than it will give you good information. Ideally, you want to get to a place where you can start to intuitively understand your hunger signals and start to learn what your body needs. And then each day make decisions is going to inch you closer to that way, because that's the most sustainable approach. The problem is we were never taught how to eat, as we discussed, but when we jump from diet to diet, we're only learning how those diets work, not necessarily like the best way to eat for your life at this point, at this structure. And that's the key, because there are things we can pull away from every type of eating every type of diet, I should say, that are beneficial. But again, any particular type of diet, whether it's paleo, whether it's something like keto, whether it's low carb, Mediterranean, doesn't matter. They tend to not work long term because of the inherent restriction. And so what we want to get to a place, at Define, you get our Never Look Back program, where when you start, we create a preliminary plan to help focus on a few things based on where you're at and where you want to go. Because when you're trying to make too many changes at once, it's very unlikely those changes are going to be sustainable. The rate of which you're making those changes is just not going to work. You're going to burn yourself out. When you can make a few subtle changes at once, not only is it about getting in the habit of those changes, it's about understanding how those changes fit your life. That is the key. Because if you can understand how those changes fit your life, it doesn't matter whether, let's say you're a nurse, whether you're on shift or you're off shift, because that's something a lot of nurses struggle with, right? It's like their life when they're on shift is completely different in terms of like their schedule than when they're off shift. If you don't understand how to make that work given a circumstance, you're going to be screwed. You're going to go all or nothing, right? Same thing when you travel or when you're out to dinner. If you don't learn how to eat in the wild, so to speak, I don't care what diet you're following right now, it will not be long-term. The goal should be how to eat in the wild in a way that fits your goals. It's not about what you can do or what you should do. It's about what you can do that you will do. How can you eat in a way that fits your lifestyle long-term? That's what we want. It's not about perfection, it's about consistency. And so going back to like quantities of food, it's important to realize, especially for women over 40, protein is going to be the most important macronutrient, because something called sarcopenia, which I'll get to in a few minutes, is a natural degeneration of muscle tissue. That means you're losing muscle rapidly as you age. It happens to all of us, but it picks up particularly for women, especially when you hit 40, and literally every year thereafter it accelerates, meaning your body's just naturally losing muscle. And so to combat that, resistance training becomes important, but protein intake as well. And so I don't want to fixate on how much you should eat, but in our Never Look Back program, for instance, I think I did a whole episode on this on the podcast, but we recommend starting, like we use your hand as a way to use your hand to figure out how many portions you should have, right? Because it's something travels with you no matter where you go. At least I would hope so. So, like for instance, like 2 fistfuls of protein per day, right, or something of the sort. And if you're interested in the amount of how much you should be eating, I'd recommend to listen to that podcast because we're not going to jump into the weeds on that. But my point is, using your hand to figure out how much you should eat is going to be way, again, you're not putting food in your hand, you're just referencing it, but it's something you can do on the fly. Protein is the one that you really want to make sure you're having enough of. And so while I just said I don't recommend tracking all the time, I do recommend every so often, every say once a quarter, it would be good to track how much you are eating, and particularly protein, just so you can check in and see where you're at. Not from like a judgmental standpoint, but just to check in and make sure that you're on par. And so with that, a rule of thumb with protein is 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight per day. So you'd eat 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight of protein in terms of ounces per day. So, if you're on 160, you want to be 140, be 140 grams, or I said ounces, grams of protein per day. That's, obviously a rough number, but that is one that is pretty damn accurate if I'm looking across the board. But again, not something you need to fixate on every day and track every day, but something you need to aim towards. So with protein, the no-brainers with protein is to add collagen to your coffee. It's what's called a habit stack. You're already having coffee or tea. Why not just mix it in and let it just give you protein without you having to think about it? Protein shake is something every woman should do every day as well. It doesn't have to be any particular type in terms of vegan versus whey versus, some of these other options. But obviously, if you have lactose issues, then go towards more of a vegan, or egg white protein. Nonetheless, having one protein shake and collagen a day, those are staples. And on top of that, every single time you eat, you want to make sure you're having protein. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. It's carbohydrates and fat. So carbohydrates, when you are looking to lose 10 or more pounds, and again, if you're not a competitive athlete, you don't technically need to eat carbohydrates in terms of traditional carbohydrates, like your breads, your pastas, that sort of thing. Because, fruits and vegetables are considered carbohydrates, but we're talking about traditional carbohydrates. So if you are looking to lose 10 or more pounds, your body technically doesn't need carbohydrates. However, like I was saying before, is that anytime you tell your brain not to have something, you're going to want more of it. Plus, what we found over the years is that when you cut out carbohydrates for a long period of time, your body gets more sensitive to carbohydrates. So I would recommend, without question, to focus 99% of the time on gluten-free carbohydrates, because even if you don't have celiacs, that, the actual reaction to carbs, it's likely that the way some of these carbs are processed, your body's going to have some intolerance, which can create bloat and a lot of other issues not worth dealing with. So ideally, more times than not, when you're having carbohydrates, have gluten-free carbohydrates. But when you think about carbs, like I said, don't cut them out. Instead, rotate them. What does rotation mean? Well, it can mean any number of things. We sit down with you to figure this out with our members here at Define. But just listening to this, an easy rule of thumb is just to cut down what you're currently doing. I know that sounds so simple, but really, that's all this stuff is, guys, by the way. The stuff that makes it complex is a self-sabotage. It's the inner conflict that's going on. But there's no certainty of just eat this exact amount, because that's not something that translates into everyday life. And so when I say an allowance for the amount of carbohydrates, what I'm saying is if every day you're having 3 servings of carbohydrates right now, cut it down to 1 a day. If every day you're having 1 serving of carbohydrates, then do every other day, right? And you can kind of play with that and keep sort of regressing the amount you have until you get to a point where you feel comfortable, something that you can do that fits into your life where you don't feel deprived. I would have at least 1 serving once a week. You want to cut down from where you're at right now, but not cut it out completely. With carbohydrates, focus on gluten-free, carb rotating, right? Those are the 2 big things. And the third thing of carbohydrates you really want to focus on is portion size. So we talked about your body not necessarily needing carbohydrates when you are looking to lose 10 or more pounds. However, you could easily have 70 grams of carbohydrates just from, most people's portions of rice. So if you're having something like rice or something that's really dense in carbohydrates, make sure you do portion. So an example of a portion of rice would be a quarter cup of rice, which is a hell of a lot different than a full cup of rice. It's very easy to put a full cup of rice on your plate. So when it comes to carbohydrates, those are the three things you need to think about is focus on gluten-free, rotate your carbohydrates, and definitely keep in mind the portion size of your carbohydrates. And if you're having a tough time eating the amount of protein that I'm suggesting, what I would say is before you eat anything else on your plate, have protein. That's a very important rule of thumb. Again, simple, I understand, but this is something women deal with, especially as your metabolism slows down. They'll say, I'm having a hard time eating that much amount of protein, right? Okay, well, then have a little bit less salad, have a bigger piece of protein. That would be that much more important. I would say do that every day instead of more salad, less protein. It will serve you well, trust me. So the last macronutrient I want to talk about, well, the last one there is fats. Now, fats, as you probably have heard the movement over the last 10 plus years of healthy fats. This is true. Good fats are good for you and they are important. These are your olive oils, these are your coconut oils, these are your avocados, these are your raw nuts of the world. That being said, fats are dense. They're 9 calories a gram. And so this is why I really discourage most people from keto, is because when you're focused on a high fat diet, you better make sure you're in ketosis because it's very easy to screw that up. With fat being 9 calories a gram, it's over twice as dense as a protein or a carbohydrate, meaning you can easily overeat fats and pay the price, and even good fats, by the way, right? Like any of the ones I just mentioned. When you are looking to lose fat, it is important to be mindful of the amount of fat you are taking in, unless you are doing a keto-based diet. The rules are out the window when it comes to that particular diet. But I would highly discourage you from doing a keto-based diet because, again, it's very easy to mess that up. It's very hard for your body to follow keto long-term. And it can cause some metabolic damage if you're going back and forth from eating that way. There's a learning curve. There's a learning curve for your body. There's a learning curve for your mind. I would discourage it. Obviously, do with it what you will. However, in the interim, I would be very mindful of the portion size of your fats as well. And again, I'm not saying measuring everything. I'm just being mindful of like, hey, if you're using, say, when you're cooking, be careful how much oil you're putting out on your pan. Anytime you're cooking, unless you're cooking something like a sauce, because, you got to make a sauce with some real avocado oil from Italy. How you doing? But, seriously, you got to do that, right? But really, if you're not cooking something like a sauce that sort of requires you to use an oil, which, by the way, when you are cooking at a moderate to high heat, use avocado oil as opposed to olive oil. Use olive oil, medium or lower heats, or on salad or something that's already cooked. But when you are cooking sauces, then it would be something like avocado oil, but still be mindful of the quantity of which you're using. So when you're cooking proteins and vegetables and stuff like that, use avocado oil spray because you're going to get no fat, but you're going to get, lubricate the pan, lubricate the whatever it is that you're cooking. So that's a really good way to be mindful of your fats. When it comes to stuff like nuts, I would consider nuts a fat versus a protein. A lot of people think of nuts as a protein. If you're a vegan, then I would consider nuts as a protein because relative to the other things that you're eating, that has a lot of protein. But if you're someone who is not a vegan, I would consider nuts as more of a fat because the fat relative to the overall calories is higher than it is protein. So with that, I would prefer to have an all protein snack as opposed to something like nuts, as long as you're getting some fats throughout your day, right? So good ways to incorporate fat is using, olive oil, on your salad instead of, so one of those dressings that could be high in sugar, high in fat, something like that. And, you drizzling it as opposed to pouring it, being mindful of how much you're using. Very, very important. But be mindful of the amount of fats that you're having. Think about portioning, small portion. Again, you don't have to get to like the measuring of it all, but just be mindful of the amount of carbs and the amount of fat that you are using. And the last thing I would say on all of these macronutrients is whenever you are sort of eating a meal where you're kind of having whatever you want to have, it's like a quote unquote cheat meal, still prioritize protein because that will slow down your system and it will prevent you from eating more than you would otherwise. Try to stay away from just ever having carbohydrates. That's a really easy way to gain fat. Say just having a bowl of pasta with no protein. So even if you are having a quote unquote cheat meal, have protein and have it first. So we talked a little bit about alcohol earlier on. I want to circle back to that. Again, I don't think it's worth telling yourself you should not have alcohol. Why you should never do a dry October or dry November or December is because you're losing what is not true weight. You're losing weight that's reflective of cutting something out, not losing weight reflective of a way of living that's going to be sustainable. Meaning, whenever you introduce alcohol back into your diet, the inflammation and all the other things are going to kick back up. And all you really did to your body was cause more stress, not to mention what you did to your mind. Because if you are someone who enjoys cocktails and you said to yourself for a month you're not going to have it, and that was hard for you to do, you created more stress for what reason? Interesting about alcohol is if it's done in a proportioned way, it can actually help us deal with stress. I'm not suggesting that be your go-to. Definitely not. I'm just suggesting that sometimes when we tell ourselves not to have something, we're actually creating more stress than just actually having a little bit of it. So I'd say rather than all or nothing, right? It's that gray area. Find the right amount of allowance that works for you. So if you're currently having a glass of wine every night, well, have one every other night. Currently doing every other night, have it twice a week, right? Get the idea, creating an allowance for yourself. And then, of course, be mindful of how much you're having, how much, drinks you're having, but also the types that you're having. IPAs have made a lot of healthy men gain a belly, right? And a lot of women who like them as well. Cosmos and high sugary drinks, just stay away from. Just like you want to make sure anytime you're eating a carb, you have a protein. Anytime you're drinking alcohol, you want to try to keep sugar down as low as you can. Not only is it going to cause a worse hangover, it's really not good for your waistline, and combined with the empty calories that is just alcohol. So give yourself an allowance, find something that is cleaner. So like a red wine, champagne, an ultralight beer, tequila, or vodka, generally with water, club soda, something of those sorts. These are always going to be better options. Use fruit to garnish, no syrups or anything like that. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about when it comes to nutrition is lactose and gluten intolerances. Again, just like I mentioned a few moments ago, I think a lot of us have a gluten intolerance, even if we're not considered a celiacs, just because of the way some of this stuff is overly processed. The same could be said about lactose. There's a lot of women who rely on cheese as their source of protein or milk as their source of protein. Now, I'm not saying to cut the cheese. Get that? That's kind of like a dad joke, cutting cheese, passing gas. Yeah. All right. Never mind. I'm not saying to cut out cheese out of your diet completely. But I am saying if that's your main source of protein, then we got to change things up, or else I guarantee you there's some intolerance going on around your waistline, because that's generally what will happen with lactose is you can store fat as a byproduct of your body not able to process the cheese as cleanly as it might need to. So cheese shouldn't, again, nothing, two words you should always make sure to never use are always a nothing. So you don't have to cut out cheese completely. However, I would not have it most days of the week. I would allow yourself it once a week if it's something you really enjoy. If you're going to have it more frequently, think about cheeses that are a little bit better for and easier for your body to process. So a very simple, easy, quick fix is using grated Parmesan cheese, because when it's grated, as long as you don't abuse it, you're not going to use a ton of it, right? So that means the calories are going to be minimal. Beyond that is feta cheese, like a high quality feta or high quality goat cheese, especially. Those are just, there's less processing. Your body can handle it more. There's going to be less of an issue with it. When it comes to like Greek yogurts, that's a difficult one because some Greek yogurts are better than others. And some people tolerate Greek yogurts who have lactose intolerance issues. Others do not. So I would say if you're going to do yogurt, I would do a Greek yogurt. And I would choose something like a Chobani or a Faye or something like, even Kirkland has a good Greek yogurt. I would stay away from yogurt that is prepackaged with fruit. And just imagine if you put strawberries in your plain yogurt and you put it in the fridge for a week, and then you looked at that Greek yogurt, it would not look too good. Now, I realize there's these prepackaged fruit Greek yogurts are sealed. I understand that. But if you look at the label, there's not a whole lot on there to help you understand why is that fruit able to be reserved in such a way that it is, right? There are chemicals, there are things mixed into that fruit to prolong its life, which quite frankly, unnecessary. We're getting enough extra stuff in our bodies where we can avoid it. Let's focus on that. And so instead of the no sugar Greek yogurt where it tastes really good, but there's no sugar, just artificially sweetened, don't do that. And instead of fruit that is packaged in Greek yogurt, get just plain Greek yogurt and add your own fruit to it. It will always be a better method, whether it's frozen fruit or fresh fruit, and focus on a Greek yogurt as opposed to a regular. When it comes to milk, similar issue to the cheese, likely causing some intolerance around the stomach. Milk alternatives, almond, cashew, oat, those can be good options. Just realize with those options, you're not getting protein. So if you're relying on milk for protein, you're not going to get that from some sort of alternative. I would stay away from soy, by the way. Soy can be an issue, especially in the food manufacturing world, that can just mess with women's estrogen. Even men's estrogen, I wouldn't suggest that. And if you're going to use one of those alternatives, I would use it, again, not something that you should have every single day if you don't need it, right? If you're going to do a protein shake, ideally just do it with water. Save on those extra calories. Like where you can save, right? That's kind of like what we're looking for is subtle changes. Now, again, there's good, better, and best with everything that we do. So you have to sort of make these decisions for yourself. And I'm just inviting you to think of like, rather than cutting out everything, what are some ways of which we can cut down a little bit here and there? But there is no real reason to have a milk alternative every day, unless, of course, you kind of need it, you want it as part of what you're doing. And if you are, just be mindful of your portions. And just, again, know that you're not going to be getting protein from it. And where you can cut it out, cut it out. Now, some people would be like, look, I love my coffee with oat milk. There's nothing in the world that I would never give it up. I wouldn't even give my first child up. Be like, all right, then who cares? And have a little bit of that. Again, not the biggest deal in the world. We got to look for areas of which we can make some changes that are not going to intrude on your non-negotiables. Because I think it's important to identify what your non-negotiables are. And then when you figure out what your non-negotiables are, dance around there. But you don't want to fight with yourself, especially if you're someone who's struggling with weight. It's already hard enough. Like, let's not make it harder than it needs to be. So find out what your non-negotiables are. And then from there, we can make some changes here and there. The next thing I want to talk about is intermittent fasting. This is something that a lot of people would be like, oh, it's worked really well for me. Others would be like, I tried, it didn't work for me. Others would be like, I can't do it, it's too hard. Whatever that is for you, here's what I would say. Number one, anybody can intermittent fast if they want to intermittent fast, if you do it the right way. So a lot of people are like, I can never do that. That's not true. You could do it. Now, I would say if you have hypothyroid as a woman, I would stay away from fasting. And I did a whole episode on fasting, so I'm not going to get too far into the weeds of it. But what I would say is the way we do our fasting is much different. We allow collagen in your coffee or tea during your fast. We allow a protein shake during your fast because, again, protein being something a lot of women are not getting enough of. So especially if you are intermittent fasting, or a lot of people are saying, well, I don't really intermittent fast, but I'm not hungry until 2 or 3, so I kind of intermittent fast. No. If you're intermittent fasting, you need to be intentionally intermittent fasting. Why that's important is because if you're not like intentional about what you're doing, you're not going to get enough nutrients. So even if you are intentional about what you're doing, it's hard for you to get the amount of protein you need in an 8-hour window, assuming you're doing a 16-8, 16 hours of fast, 8 hours of feeding. So food for thought there. So I would say for sure that intermittent fasting is something that can be beneficial, but it's not something you necessarily need to do either, right? Because what can happen is, from a behavioral standpoint, you're used to having breakfast every morning. Then you got some stress in your life, or you're at work, and all of a sudden, if you cut out that breakfast, the stress is starting to eat away at you. It can elevate your cortisol. The last thing you want to do is do intermittent fasting so that you can lose fat to only elevate your cortisol. That makes no sense, which is another reason why we allow the collagen in your coffee and the protein shake within your fast, because it makes it easier. You're having something in your system, but something in your system your body's going to use. So it does give you an element of fasting. Again, we're not going to go too far into the weeds with it, but intermittent fasting is something that can elevate your metabolism, help you burn off extra calories than you might otherwise. And so for more information on that, check out one of the episodes I did on this podcast about intermittent fasting. Go way more into details there. Thanks for tuning in to That Was Yesterday with me, Joe Carabase. And remember, Every step forward is progress. We'll catch you next time. And in the meantime, if you found any value from this episode, please share with friends and go ahead and give us a 5-star review. I appreciate you. Talk to you soon.